Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rendezvous with Jamie McGlue. So we're going to talk today about war, and I'm going to basically make the case um, as briefly as possible for peace and for open-mindedness and for talking about controversial things. Just having the faith that most people, um, if you show enough um, empathy and respect, that most people resonate with that, and that we can have these difficult conversations. Um, so I'm going to talk about Ukraine, Palestine, and Taiwan. So three flashpoints which could cause World War III if we're not careful, um, and three uh, conflicts or disagreements where um, I think it's rather there's many layers to it and it's misunderstood a lot of the time. Um, and I don't know everything. Like I'm pretty busy. Even if I could um, read to my heart's content about these things, I'm still flawed. I do the best I can to be obsessed with truth, and so I'm delighted when I learn I'm wrong. Like I kind of pride myself on bending with truth, so it's I feel no sense of embarrassment or like, oh, I've been diminished because I've been proven wrong, because I feel like, no, I have the power of truth behind me. I surrender to correction. Go, oh, please show me where I'm mistaken. And I think it's a really powerful, beautiful way to live, and a very healthy way to live, and that's what the future is for humanity. We need to kind of become more willing to be open-minded and discuss things. So I don't know everything. I'm going to give you my understanding of these conflicts, um, like what's actually going on and what I think we should do. But I'm just going to say up front, when I was thinking before, doing this, as I could be wrong about a bunch of things here. I think I'm correct about what's going on, but I'm sure there's at least a few details I'm wrong about. You would think so, right? But I don't think I'm wrong about anything massive. But maybe I'll find out in a year. I'll do by doing more research. Oh, whoops, I was actually that podcast. Oh, I kind of put out the wrong idea. It's possible, and we all have to be comfortable with that. Do your best to be aware and to communicate good ideas and set a good example. But it's never going to be perfect, and you have to have the courage to just do your best and know that that's better than nothing, because we all have to do something. So yeah. So, okay, with that said, so I'm going to talk first about Ukraine. So, the conventional story of what happened is Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked, um, and basically, Vladimir Putin wanted to recreate the Soviet Union, or maybe Russians are just militaristic and aggressive in the culture, getting invaded by the Mongols and almost destroyed in around the 1200s, I think, and being dominated by them politically for quite a long time until they overthrew them, um, and then invaded by Napoleon, and almost destroyed in like the 1800s, and then invaded by during World War I by the Germans and Austrians. Well, I don't know if the Austrians got into Russia proper, but the Germans, I believe, were in Russian territory fighting. Yep. Um, and then World War II, of course, Hitler invading and destroying like apparently 1 in 7 Russians died fighting to get rid of the Germans out of Russia, and an area, according to RFK Jr., an area the size of basically was destroyed, like razed to the ground, because they were doing to stop the Nazis getting deeper in. They were burning. They would like destroy the areas as they were retreating. And so basically, um, an area of like from the east coast of the USA to Chicago, kind of all that east coast just vroom, razed to the ground. That's what Russia dealt with, but in Russia's Western European part. Anyway, so you're pretty sensitive about invasions and stuff like that. But the argument goes that okay, they've got that worry about this kind of thing, fear of attack, but also that they expanded from Europe, and they being originally from the Vikings, by the way, created Rus, which was actually in Ukraine. Kiev was the first city, and then Novgorod, and in Russia, what's now Russia. Um, that they developed there like a state, but then it expanded eastward all the way to Asia, the Pacific Ocean, eventually, and they, kind of, they what you call that, submitted or kind of conquered, all kinds of groups and had them, um, uh, join the fold. And there was a Russian, like an attempt to Russify the place, bring it under one culture. And so some people say they've got this imperialist mindset, and anyway, whatever way you want to think, the argument is that they invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine has been fighting in defense. And that's why the world should all be supporting Ukraine. And that, Russia could easily just then keep moving. If we don't stop here, it would be like Hitler, appeasement again. He's just going to keep moving. Now, you can probably guess from my tone, while I have, great sympathy, and I think it's really heartbreaking what's happened to Ukraine. And I know many Ukrainians. I'm an English teacher, and I've met like um, many Ukrainians, many Russians too. But yeah, it's really devastating. What's like over 1 million young people dead, and just lives destroyed, just cities absolutely smashed to the ground. And think about like all of the developed world is having a birth rate crisis, where the future of our nations is really in jeopardy with not enough people not having enough babies. Imagine having like 1 million of your young people wiped off that. So the future of Ukraine is looking like really quite difficult. They really, you know, I believe they can, if they have a spiritual, um, I guess, a spiritual revolution. They can take this could be a blessing ultimately, but definitely so far it's looking like a curse. It's like really terrible what's happened to them. So we should all have a great empathy and sympathy for Ukraine. However, um, my understanding, based on a lot of reading and listening to experts and things, is that actually Russia did not start the war. Ukraine started the war. More accurately, the CIA started the war and basically used Ukraine as a chess piece to attack Russia. So and so that's why actually Russia was acting in self-defense essentially in this war. And so I'm going to lay out why, the case for why that actually is. But I guess I should say, I meant to say this at the start. My basic shtick with all this, my basic idea is peace. Peace is, a very high value. There is a time, justice, I guess, and it's maybe even more important. Um, but, what but it depends. Sometimes it's time to just end the war, end the wars. You have to find a balance. But when enough people have died, um, but self-defense. We have the right to violence only in self-defense. But where do we draw the lines of the self? Just the individual self? Definitely, you have the right to defend yourself. So I have the right to defend myself against you. If you come attacking me, I can use violence to stop you. Um, and if someone tries to attack my family, also we say, yeah, sure, you have the right to protect your family. Oh, they're not attacking you; they're attacking your wife. Well, yeah, good luck. uh, I'm obviously I have the right to defend my family as the representative of my family, and then your nation. The nation has a right to defend itself, and I have a right to use violence in defense of my nation. But what about your planet or your fellow human beings? So you can see where, or a stranger in a bar, someone's trying to you know, attack them, you can intervene and protect them, right? And it's self-defense, or it's defense anyway. And so, and then it comes down to, okay, who really started this, and was that necessary? And but so it gets blurry when we self-defense, which we all agree on, basically most people, um, comes into like, oh well, where do we draw the lines of what self can be defended, or where does the boundary of defense lie? But in either case, like, yes, you have the right to self violence and self defense, but and nations do. So Ukraine has the right to defend itself. Russia has the right to defend itself. But peace. My basic point is that um, we things are very complicated, and so we should not jump on the bandwagon and go, "Oh, I read an article and it says this person's bad, therefore I'm going to go say it's bad, and that makes me feel good. It feels like I'm a good person. I'm on the right side. You know, I can put the flag on my, social media thing and all that. It's like, um, we really need to be very careful when it comes to conflict, whether it's gossip in your friend circle or whether it's a war between nations. Um, to understand things are very complex. And so who I'm, really interested in these things, and I read a lot about these things, but I still preface my opinions by saying, look, I could be wrong, you know, and I mean that. Like I know I can be wrong. I've been wrong. Say Israel Palestine stuff. I've flipped back and forth several times over my life, um, in terms of like beginning being like, oh, what are they doing? Why are they always fighting? What? Surely there's a way where they can find peace. Come on, like doesn't it just seems mad? It seems insane to then going this side, that side, this side, that side, thinking one is more in the right. Um, anyway, I'll tell you a little bit later what I think now. But basically, yeah. So I think the ultimate thing is we need to encourage peace. So we need to encourage everyone, including the Russians and the Ukrainians, to try to access the spiritual dimension, read Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now or A New Earth, and understand that the origin of all injustice is the ego, and it's where you cut yourself off from others. You no longer perceive them as self, and like you're a branch on the tree, I'm a branch on the tree. If I chop you off, I'm chopping off myself because I'm also the tree. I'm not just this branch, I'm also the tree. You and I are one on the deeper level. Even though, yeah, you're a separate branch to me, we're in some sense we're not one, sure. You're not doing the podcast, but in a deeper sense, you are doing the podcast here. Um, and so that spiritual awareness, which is what religion is meant to ideally introduce us to, this direct experience of oneness, which is God, um, or the aspect of God, one aspect of God at least, um, uh, then through that, so Ukrainians, when enough Ukrainians and Russians, like there's wars, been unloosed here, so of course that's going to go to its conclusion. But what good can we do is, I think, encourage as many people as possible in these nations and in other nations to just access inner peace, become a more peaceful, aware person who doesn't create conflict, who tries to create peace within oneself and within the world, um, as well as justice and standing up for what's right, but understanding that the limitations of what we know and that there's so many narratives. I told you the narrative in favor of, Ukraine's the victim in this war, and I'm about to tell you the narrative from the other side, which I believe is more accurate. Um, and but either way, these are narratives. Who knows exactly what's going on? What we need to do is to get as many people as possible sharing their narratives. Okay, finding the peace within yourself, sharing different ideas about what's going on. You don't need to believe them, but you need to listen to them at least once. And that's how peace is possible. Because I think most people, when they hear the truth, something tingles inside them. They go, oh, interesting. Um, we could say evolutionarily, it's more adaptive to have that tingling sensation when you hear the truth. The humans who didn't really resonate with truth were less likely to survive the various apocalypses of history and all the predators and stuff. So we're hardwired to be aligned with reality, actually, even though we can get misled by our egos, our just kind of get a bit out of control. Anyway, so point being, I urge we should try to find peace as much as possible. Do not escalate the wars anywhere. Try to stop them now, as of course, the countries involved, the nations involved, may say, hey, yeah, you think we need to stop, but no, right now we need to obliterate the enemy. If there's a snake in your house, we're like, hey, let's just take a breather, everyone. No, we have the snake cornered. We need to kill the snake. Okay, well, fair enough. That might be true in some situations. I don't know. But from the outside, I could say in all these situations, I think peace is the right response, and genocide is not. Um, and there are ways, if we get everyone involved and everyone starts kind of sharing narratives and being a bit more open-minded, um, peace definitely is possible, um, without needing to totally destroy any side. So that's basically the thing. There are these different narratives. It's complex. I'm going to present them. You don't need to believe them, but I'm going to present the two sides of all three flashpoints here. And um, I don't know exactly what the answer is. I'm sure it's more complicated. Even the situation's more complicated than I'm presenting here, although this is pretty spicy, what you're going to hear. But so we need to maintain empathy and, a sense of universal love, even for all humans, even stupid humans or evil humans who are turning away from the love. Maintain empathy and compassion and um, try to communicate as much as possible so that we can all figure out what actually needs to happen. And um, if where violence needs to happen, it has to happen. But try to make sure there's no excessive violence or minimize the excessive unnecessary violence. And then we can kind of, with greater education, we can get beyond this stuff. I believe we will have world peace eventually if we can just transform our consciousness, like A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle kind of talks about, and many other books, towards when you see yourself in the other, why would you attack them? Um, so that's it. The cells in my body are working together because they're in sync. They understand they're part of the one. So we can all have our own separate nations and have our freedom and prosperity and peace and justice and our own personal, kind of flourishing and expression, but understanding the harmony and working together by seeing ourselves in the others, finding the beauty in these other cultures, and finding some sort of fair balance. Okay, so now that's the overarching point. And here I'm going to tell you the rest of this video is these narratives. So the narratives from the Russian point of view. And yeah, so uh, when the Soviet Union collapsed, um, uh, when was that? Was that 91? I think. Yeah, I think I was born August 91. I think it was a few months after that it collapsed. So, but when East Germany basically, the Berlin Wall came down. I think that was 89, was it? There was basically, like this desire to reunify Germany, East and West. And there were 400,000 Russian soldiers in East Germany. And the West was saying, look, do the right thing, just let Germany come together. It's the right thing to do. Just, let them do it. And the Russians are like, are you crazy? Like, we've got a 400,000 men with guns in, these very expensive um, army barracks, or et cetera, throughout the place. And we're just going to move backwards. Like, and the West was, yeah, like, it's the right thing to do. Come on, just trust us. Like, we will not move an inch east. There was a deal. They made a deal. We will not move. NATO will not move. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Western Europe and North America, basically. We will not, which was their intended to protect, in theory, protect against the Soviet Union expansion for Europe. They said, look, we will not expand east at all. Just let East Germany join Germany, West Germany. Let it reunite. The Russians said, okay, we'll trust you. And they moved back. And after that, then in the 90s, NATO launched an aggressive, illegal war. They did not get United Nations approval. It was illegal under international law. They an illegal, aggressive war against Yugoslavia, leading to the breakup of Yugoslavia. Um, and say what you want about, like, okay, there's a genocide going on, but there are conventions of uh, international law, and there's other ways to do it by saying, like, okay, let us take these people and protect them or whatever, um, but going and breaking international law because you think you've got a good reason, you're not allowed to do that. What if China did that? Oh, we think this is, you're doing the wrong thing by the people in Iraq or Iran. Yeah, we're going to go invade. We'd be, hey, China, what are you doing? You're not allowed to do that. You know, so, or if, yeah, they said, oh, we think, you shouldn't be letting children have transgender treatments, because, the soul is neutral, but the body is male or female, and you're harming all these children. We're going to invade you. So where does it end? The whole point is, like, with sovereignty means you have your sphere, we have our sphere, right? And bad things can happen, good things can happen. We don't always know which is which, but we have to engage through diplomacy, not violence. That's the whole system of international law, right? So NATO didn't do that. They attacked Yugoslavia, right? And Russia, who's historically connected to the Slavs and Yugoslavia, um, they were very like aggrieved by this. Like, oh my God, what are you doing? These are the people we just kind of helped letting them spread into East Germany. And it just got worse and worse. So NATO expanded. They admitted Poland into NATO. They said they wouldn't go 1 inch east. They let Poland in. They let, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, um, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They kept moving east, 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 and Russia kept being like, "Hey, stop! What are you doing? Stop! 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 Like we had a deal. You're getting closer. What do you?" And then this kind of demonization of Russia stuff, like, "Oh, Russia's aggressive and da da da." And Russia's like, okay, you're breaking the deal. You're moving closer to us with bringing your armies closer and closer, and you're constantly demonizing us with lies in the press. It looks like you're planning to attack us. We've been attacked before. We are very careful about this. What are you doing? Stop this. Stop. And NATO just ignored them, kept going. And and basically NATO is led by the USA, the most powerful force within it. So it's kind of Europe is basically a vassal state for the USA. Um, who runs the USA? Maybe bankers in England, but okay, that's another story. But um, and so Russia's saying like stop, but they just kept spreading east, east, east. Put missile launchers in Poland, and so Russia now has to spend billions of dollars in new defense systems and updating their military technology when they could be putting into civilian infrastructure and stuff for the benefit of the people. This goes on and on. And eventually they say, like, but Ukraine is a red line. You cannot go into Ukraine because we've been invaded through Ukraine before. There's no like, there's a bunch of, it's very vulnerable. There's not like a bunch of mountains preventing, separating Russia and Ukraine. You can just access Russia from Ukraine very easily. It's like USA, you would not let China or us set up, military bases in Canada or in Mexico. That's too close to you. You wouldn't do it. Same thing with us, right? Um, and the USA, and the West kind of ignored that, and they kept pushing for the Ukraine to become part of the EU and part of NATO. Um, and Russia was like saying, like, look, just promise us they won't become part of the NATO or the EU, and there's no problem. It's all good. They wouldn't do it. They would not agree to that. And then uh, in 2014, there was a CIA coup in Ukraine. So there was a democratic election, and the people was the one side was like wanting to more join the EU and NATO and stuff. The other side more like stay under in the sphere of influence of Russia, the traditional kind of like America to Western Europe kind of thing. Like they have certain influence that they let us do what we want, but if there's big things involving the region, they kind of tell us what to do, just like America does to Western Europe, right? Same thing. Um, and you go, okay, that's kind of just the way the world works, right? And it has a certain logic to it. It does prevent big conflict between the big powers if it's allowed to function properly, spheres of influence. So the election, the pro-Russia party won, right? And by the way, a huge amount of Ukraine is ethnic Russian and speaks Russian as the first language. Um, the south and east of the country, um, vast majority are Russian speakers, ethnic Russians, and indeed that was Russia until 100 years ago, in I think the 1930s. Khrushchev, I think, was it the 50s? Khrushchev, I think, um, uh, it was all part of the Soviet Union, but the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics, it was the Ukrainian SSR and the Russian SSR. They basically, for some reason, passed off land from the Russian one to the Ukrainian one, um, and but it was part of Russia, and then they were like, okay, here, but it's all part of the same country ultimately, so no problem. But then when the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly there was like millions of ethnic Russians who are locked outside of Russia because now they're in Ukraine. That area, so where all this war is going on, that was Russia 100 years ago. All right, so borders kind of go back and forth in certain places. Anyway, so there was this election, and pro-Russian party won, and they're like, okay, we're still going to trade and connect with Europe, but we're not going to become part of those institutions. We're going to keep part of the Russian kind of allied with Russia, but yeah, want to connect culturally and economically with Europe. Wasn't good enough for the Americans apparently, and there was a CIA coup. The what was it? National Endowment for Democracy was the CIA front, where they get money from the CIA, and they basically fomented a revolution, a revolt, or big the Maidan um, protests and revolution thing, where basically paying people to engage and beef up these protests. There's always some people who are organically engaged in it, but they were spearheading it, pushing it, funding it, bringing people in, and shots were fired at the president's residence. The president fled the country, the new president, or I don't know if they were re-elected or if it was a new guy, but pro-Russian. And some new guy was installed, the pro-Western guy, um, non-democratically. It was a coup. He lost the election, but he was put in there, um, and was branded as democracy. And Victoria Nuland, who is I think the Secretary of State, she is on the phone. There's a recording of her hand picking the cabinet, who's going to be in the government. And lo and behold, a few weeks later or whenever, they became the exact people in the government. So it was handpicked. It was the Americans, the CIA, overthrew a democratically elected country government and put in their own government. And not just that, but then they on Russia's doorstep. Imagine if they did that. Russia did that to Mexico. America would not be happy, would they? But not just that. Then the Ukrainian government they forbade Russian as a language for engaging with government, engaging with the education system, etc. I think street signs and stuff had to now all be Ukrainian, and uh, so there's a huge chunk of the population who are like, you're banning our culture and our language, like which we speak with our children with. This is our country. You can't do that. You're put in by the CIA. This isn't even legitimate. And even if you were, it would still be messed up. But like you've just been put in here 5 minutes ago by some foreigners, and they were not very happy. So Crimea had a referendum. They seceded. Like we're not part of this anymore. By the way, I think Crimea had its own its own SSR back in the day. They were separate to Ukraine back under the within the Soviet Union, at least at some point. And I think when it collapsed, they wanted to be separate, but they were kind of ignored and pulled into the Ukrainian system. But anyway, so they seceded. In the east, the Donbass, right? So these provinces in the east of Ukraine, which are real 90% Russian, ethnic Russians, they were like, yeah, we are out. You guys are crazy. And not just that, also another part of the puzzle is there's a part within that force which became took power in that coup, CIA-backed coup. A lot of them were neo-Nazis, literal neo-Nazis. They have the black sun insignia on their uniform, the Azov Brigade, etc. And you call them ultra-nationalists, but they're neo-Nazis. And they called what's the Banderites after Bandera, I think was his surname, some Nazi collaborator, because Ukraine, when the Nazis came through, a bunch of them collaborated, and so that lineage, those families, those institutions, or those communities, maintains that appreciation for that, and that's what that force, the inheritors of that, had a lot of power in this new Ukrainian administration, and I believe they still do, at least in the west of the country, but and so you know that's also these Russians, ethnic Russians, like, oh, you're Nazis, also great, just to add it to, um, and so they were like, yeah, okay, we're independent, and then the central government said, okay, well, we're going to come and use guns to you guys are terrorists. We're going to force you to obey the law and join us. Um, they went in over to the east, and then a big fighting breaks out between the government soldiers and the civilians or rebels, who are saying, no, you're illegitimate. We're fighting back to defend ourselves. And thousands of people died. Many, many civilians died. This began in 2014. I'm not sure the fighting, if it was a bit after, or 2016, or if it was 2014 straight away. Anyway, fighting continued with bombing and stuff, like shelling cities and stuff, until 2022. So the war didn't begin in 2022. Oh, Putin invaded. The war began before that. Ask the people in the Donbass. They were experiencing war already from years and years, and people they knew were dying, Um, and then there was Russia. They were like, Russia, come in and help us, let us be part of Russia, bring in the military. And Russia was like, no, 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 we don't want to cause a big conflict. We're gonna like try to do this diplomatically. And they were saying just peace, peace, peace. And they had the Minsk agreement, the Minsk Accord, where they brought people together, saying, look, Russia, Ukraine has to be independent. It's gonna be like Switzerland, right? It's neutral. It's not going to be part of NATO, not going to be part of the EU, and kind of demilitarized more or less, like Japan kind of thing, maybe, like, they're not allowed to have a massive army, something like that. Pretty reasonable conditions. And it was all agreed, and then I don't know exactly how. This is where my memory is failing me a bit, but I believe the Ukrainians went back on the deal and broke the deal, but I could be wrong there. But basically it was broken off, although the Russians were trying to encourage it. Um, and then so the Russians like, okay, we're wasting our time here. Okay, and then I don't know exactly what caused Putin to invade, but one factor is it turns out there was like dozens of biological weapons factories or laboratories in Ukraine. So the Americans basically were running biological weapons, which is extremely serious. That's like you release some disease and it can like wipe out huge, areas. Very, very dangerous, like atomic weapons kind of level stuff. Really dangerous. That was right on their doorstep. If that was happening in Mexico, the USA would not tolerate it, right? And so um, but whatever this is the lead up. Russia goes, okay, we're going to invade and take out these people, and that's why they called it the special military operation. They weren't saying it's an invasion. They were like, well, look, there's a threat here. We need to take out the threat. So they're using different language. They go in there and now and they went in with a fairly small force and they said tried to bring the Ukrainians to the table, right? And they did, and there was going to be peace. This is maybe a month after the war began. Um, Zelensky had signed it. Everyone was like done and dusted, and it would basically say the Minsk agreement. Yeah, okay, look, peace under those conditions. And guess what? President Joe Biden at the time sends the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, of Prime Minister of Britain, over to Ukraine to get Zelensky to tear up the agreement and go back in it and say, look, we are going to fund you. You're going to win. Don't worry. And Zelensky, for whatever reason, even though he had promised that he'd be the peace president, that's what he was elected to do, avoid war. He does the very opposite, and he um, uh, continues the war. And now, a million at least Ukrainians are dead when it could have only been a few thousand, which would be tragic enough. And so it's just awful. So, but that continues. The war continued, and basically, make a long story short, the Ukraine is basically like a proxy of NATO. So all not only are there soldiers from other countries around the world fighting there on the side of Ukraine, but huge amounts of money and military material coming in. And so it's a proxy war, NATO or in the US fighting Russia, basically. Um, there's a bunch of missiles being fired into Russia, which can only be fired by Americans. Like the Ukrainians don't have the facilities or the skill to do that. So, the Russians know what's happening. They know um, and so this goes on. But at this point, to make a long story short, where it's at is the Russians have almost totally destroyed the Ukrainian army. It's like on its last legs. The Ukrainian army is like, again, this is as far as I understand. If you want to look into this, I recommend the Duran, Duran, the Duran podcast. So they're on YouTube and other things and whatever. Um, and I find them very good about a lot of things. They've got a lot of kind of in-depth analysis of kind of controversial political topics and geopolitics. So uh, and RFK Jr.'s podcast, he talked it with a bunch of people. I guess he's a bit busy now, but I don't know if he's still doing it actually. But he had a bunch of people there talking about it as well. Anyway, where it's at currently, as far as I understand it, is the Russians have almost reached the Dnieper River, which is in the center of Ukraine. Kiev's on the river. There's a bunch of big cities there, like Zaporozhye, I think, is on the whatever. And basically, as I understand it, according to them, this is like the heart, of Ukraine. Once the Russians are on the river, there's no more geographical boundaries between the rest of Ukraine. They can just zoom across there. But the whole without the control of that river, Ukraine as a functioning state falls apart. And so not only is the Ukrainian military like radically depleted of men and like seemingly collapsing, like then also like just the state of Ukraine itself has lost so much territory, a lot of the industrial base, etc. So it's very weakened. So it looks like they can kind of make terms now, and the Russians are going to take the East and say, look, this was Russia, and then you played your cards, you went to the CIA, you attacked the Russian speakers, this is now part of Russia. That's that. Um, uh, or if they keep fighting, it looks like maybe Russia would even annex more, especially when there's Odessa in the west, which was founded by Russians, Catherine the Great, historically kind of Russian culture, a big thing. So if they're tempted, they could easily take the rest of Ukraine. Now, we could say, oh, that would be awful. But it's like, well, okay, governments are kind of gangsters everywhere, in my opinion. I'm not saying the Russians are like Putin's a great guy or anything. I don't know him. But as far as I can tell, it seems like the whole world is more or less run by mafia. And that's the way it's always been, more or less, in most epochs. And, look, I wish we didn't have such injustice in the world, but, I don't want to demonize anyone. And I'm sure they love their people and they, like, yeah. So I think basically, like, Putin, maybe he's a gangster, but he loves Russia and he wants to protect Russia. And maybe, you know, uh, other places, the same thing, Um, so that's that. Now, what are we going to do about that? Well, I reckon we should end the war and we should not escalate it. We should be urging a peace deal right away. Say, look, the war's over. No more people need to die. There's no way Ukraine can win this war unless it was to bring in World War III and everyone goes to war. And guess what? I don't want to go to war. I have young children. I don't, and when they grow up, I don't want them being pulled off to some stupid war either. We got to grow up and get through this, get past all this. So so now you've got two sides of this story, right? And you can look into it more if you want. Maybe you're busy and you just have to go by instinct and what feels right. But at least at a very minimum, I hope I can prevent you from jumping to fast conclusions. And the safest thing is like, okay, can we just try to make peace? And if we don't know exactly who's right, let's try to make peace. And if people say no, no, we have to keep fighting, keep fighting. Okay, well, at least just try to as many people as close as possible to the conflict communicate, talk to each other, share narratives, share your views, and let's try to find some common ground so that no more babies need to get exploded by missiles, right? So there you have it. All right, that's the first one. I'm trying to keep this brief, but so the second one, we'll jump over to okay, let's say Israel, Palestine, right? So um, I, kind of thought originally when I was like, it seems so unfair for Israel. Israel's done an amazing thing. They've irrigated the desert. They've got desalination plants. They're like got democracy and freedom of the press and all this stuff. In a part of the world where there's not a lot of that, and it seems really unfair that like it's always like the Palestinians or the militant groups are attacking them, and it's like what a terrible situation to be in. Like it's so scary. But I think there is more to the story, basically. And I still, again, I have Israeli friends, and I think I have a lot of appreciation for Jewish culture, and for Israelis. Like, um, shout out to Rafi, awesome dude. I've been like 10 years since I saw that guy, but cool dude. Um, but and but also Palestinians. I've met some really lovely Palestinians, and I really feel for them. Um, and so I think both sides is just terrible, and I just wish there could be peace. And I hope there can be peace. But we have to just share our points of view, honestly, and um, hope that in time this will lead to justice. Because here's the thing: if you just go, let's just obliterate, let's just use violence to solve this. Like I'm Irish, right? When violence is the way, the good guys don't always win. Like Ireland, it wasn't like, oh, the British won because they were right. It's like, no, they were just like better organized and they were gangsters and yeah, and ravaged Ireland in many ways, culturally, linguistically, you know, ecologically, destroying all the forests and all that. So, but look, so I think we don't really want to be like, yeah, let's fight it out. It's like, how do you know the that's going to serve justice? You know, um, it seems much more likely that diplomacy and logic and conversation is going to do that. So, um, especially if it's mediated by other people and there's some social pressure internationally, kind of to be like following reason and evidence. But anyway, all right, so yes, I do feel for the Israelis and for the Palestinians on the ground, both, right? Like it's just a terrible situation. But here's a bit of backstory, right? Um, so even before World War II and when the Holocaust and all that, and the Jews, feeling like, okay, we've been attacked and this is just too dangerous. We need our own. We've been a nation for a long time, but we need a state. We need a territory and our own government to protect ourselves. Um, and oh, it'd be beautiful if we could have it back where it used to be, back in the Holy Land, Um, and so, yeah, after World War II, the United Nations, I think 1947, I think, the United Nations didn't have the right to do this, by the way, but they just kind of decided, oh, we have the right, and gave that to, or a large amount of it to the Jews. Um, and but and by the way, they gave a disproportionate amount to the Jews. Like the Jewish population, say, was 10%, they gave them like 50% of the land. So it's like, but shouldn't they have 10% of the land? So, um, but why? But actually goes from before that. It was like I think the late 1800s. There was always some Jews still in the area, and across like North Africa and like the Middle East, and within the Ottoman Empire, they were kind of allowed. Like many groups, like okay, you're not allowed in the army unless you're Muslim, but you can kind of work there, pay your taxes, do your thing, don't cause problems, no worries, you do your thing. And so there were Jews in the Muslim world. Um, but a lot of the Jews came back, like the Ashkenazi Jews, kind of like European Jews, um, uh, started like immigrating into Palestine, um, uh, back in the 1800s, and that kind of increased and increased, and I think late 1800s, this guy kind of started bringing back the Hebrew language, and he kind of taught himself, I think, and like his children, and it kind of spread, and other people kind of inspired by that, and then it grew and grew and grew. That became a big force where there's this authentic cultural renewal going on, and more people kept coming. But the during the Ottoman Empire was destroyed in World War One, 1914 to 1918, right? The Turks, or the Ottoman Empire, basically were defeated. I think was it 1915, 1917? I'm not sure, but before the in the middle during the war, they collapsed, right? And the British took control temporarily, right? And maybe permanently was the plan, but um, temporarily they had the what's it called, the mandate for Palestine, and so they controlled this area. The French controlled Syria, the British controlled Palestine, and now you had what's now called Jordan. By the way, this is what some people say, like Israelis would say, which is a kind of a fair point. There is a Palestinian state already, and it's called Jordan, because Jordan was called East Palestine, and traditionally the Jews lived both east and west of the Dead Sea and the River Jordan. And you know that was East and West Palestine is what it was called up until the creation of modern history and the creation of the state of Israel and stuff. So that was turned into Jordan, but it was previously called East Palestine. Um, but so anyway, the British were controlling this whole area, and they were a bit leery of all this Jewish immigration coming in, where they had there were like Jewish lobby in Britain, which was encouraging it, and that kind of thing, and asking for more and more or whatever. Um, and so and probably a bunch of the British were Christian and kind of like sympathetic, like, oh yeah, kind of having the Jews back there, that's kind of cool. It's like back when Jesus was there. And also there's like some people believe, that oh, the Jews have to return there in order for Christ to come back, or so could be mixed motives. But anyway, but a lot of the locals were getting, at first they were kind of like friendly, and the Jews were kind of friendly, and like there's Jewish people saying, yeah, let's go with our brothers down there, like the Christians are always persecuting us, but the Muslims are maybe more closer to us, we live among them in the Ottoman Empire, etc. Anyway, so but as more and more Jews are coming in, and in the early 20th century, locals maybe started getting a bit leery of it, a bit, and things escalate. I can't remember. Now, a lot of what I'm getting here is from Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem by Martyr Made, Martyr, Made, Mad, Martyr Made podcast, which is by this guy, Daryl Cooper, who's like an amateur historian, basically. So he studies history, he was like a soldier before, that was his, but from my, people have criticized him and all that, but I don't know, from my sense of it, he's does an enormous amount of reading, and he seems quite balanced and very sympathetic to both sides of this conflict. Anyway, so that's like really long, 16 hours long or something, and it was amazing. I highly recommend it. You can also listen to Dave Smith from the Part of the Problem podcast. Libertarian guy, really cool, and I've learned a lot. This is where I heard about Martyr Made from him, and yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff there. But anyway, that's like, again, I could be wrong, but from what I understand, this is what happened. So things escalated. I can't remember who started what, but basically, there becomes more conflict between the Jews and the Arabs, the Palestinians, as more and more Jews are coming in. Now, I've heard some people say there was like very few Arabs there, or Netanyahu said like, oh, they're not native there. They moved in after the Jews came in, and they're pretending like, oh yeah, we were here the whole time. Um, no, well, from what I understand, it wasn't an incredibly populated area. There's a lot of desert, and it wasn't particularly fertile. Ironically, the land of milk and honey. But uh, but so um, nonetheless, yeah, I believe that, like, yeah, there were Palestinians there, and who's to decide what's underpopulated? It's like, oh, I think your house is underpopulated. Let me come in and help you with more people. It's like, no, no, I'm okay. I want me and my family's enough, you know. Um, so anyway, yeah, there were the Palestinians there, um, and the Jews immigrating in, and there was more and more conflict, um, and I guess of course I just should just say as backstory briefly, if you believe me, that the Jews were there long, long ago. Fado. They were living in this area of the world, um, and then I don't know all the details, but basically, they were exiled and the Romans banished them. There was a revolt. They didn't really want to assimilate into the Roman Empire, which had invaded and taken control of them. Like almost the Romans controlled all of North Africa, almost all of the Middle East, and Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, and Europe, all the way along the Danube River, all the way the south and west of the Danube, and up and halfway through Scotland in Britain. So anyway, the Jews didn't really want to fit in. They had their own culture, and pretty proud of that. And so there was a struggle and conflict. And eventually, there's a revolt, a Jewish revolt, and the Romans just destroyed them and destroyed the temple and kind of, I believe, enslaved a ton of them and just sent them off to the four corners of the empire. Um, and so then, time moves on, and I don't know exactly here how it works, but the Jews aren't a massive population in that land anymore. They're like in other countries, kind of trying to assimilate, blend in, or kind of find some niche where they can maintain their separateness, but they're always kind of the outsider, so it's a bit dodgy. Anyway, okay. So of course, that's why they say we're the indigenous people, not the Palestinians. The Palestinians like, well, yeah, but you left. Like, you can't just do that. Like, we've been here thousand years or whatever. We've been here a long, long time now. And so yeah. Right. So anyway, so conflicts escalating. Now here's the thing: during the formation of the state of Israel, there was a lot of with the my understanding is the Jews actually started the terrorism. Like there were some the was it Haganah, the Haganah, this group which are like really intense, and they would like there's stories of them intentionally going to villages, slicing off people's breasts, raping people, killing kids, all kinds of crazy stuff, in order to terrify people into just leaving, moving over to what's now Jordan. And a lot of people did that, and so then they were able to expand their territory and take over. Sounds atrocious, and it is, but again, a lot of you could make the case a lot of these people are feeling like, look, we have the right to this land. It's dirty, but someone's got to do it. Everyone's going to forget eventually, and whatever. Like can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And look, yeah, we've been killed by people throughout history. So we have to take care of ourselves. Sorry, everyone else. I'm looking after my family. And so you can see how people could rationalize it. But anyway, this then escalates more and more, and there's murders of Jews, murders of the Palestinians, and eventually the British are kind of like trying to control this, and the Jews start attacking the British, and like terrorism against the British, and it was really hectic, crazy thing where like blowing them up, soldiers dying. Eventually, the British agreed to leave, and so the United Nations creates partitions Palestine and creates the state of Israel and the Palestinian state. But it was kind of like chopped up in between them, and it was a bit messy, like where based on where the Jews had settled, but also a lot of areas where they were the minority, and so overall, like I said, three or four times the larger territory compared to their population, compared the Palestinians, and so a lot of people weren't happy, and then okay, this is voted through, and then all the Arab neighbors just well I can't remember who exactly, but yeah, they invade and they're fighting. Somehow the Jews manage to win the war, and they get more territory than they were given, and the Palestinians have lost more. And that goes on and on and on. And then eventually, 1967, the Six Day War, Israel figures out, oh, all these Arab countries are about to attack us. And they launch preemptive strikes, and this war kicks off. And then after 6 days, they've defeated everyone, and they've got even more territory. And that's kind of, I think, current borders, more or less. Um, and so you got Palestine, or the Palestinian territory, excluding Jordan, right, has now been reduced to the West Bank, which is the west bank of the River Jordan. So the River Jordan, the west of that, there's this area that's the biggest part of what's where the Palestinians live, and there's Palestinians within Israel also, and um, one Palestinian I was talking to said, in his opinion, it should just be one state, and it's like, look, everyone just gets along, and you know, that's just the way it is. Um, but yeah, anyway, I can understand the other point of view where you want your own state for your people, but anyway, and Gaza over more to the west there, where there's um, uh, yeah, like a much smaller area. And so then again, skipping forward a lot of details, but like um, I believe there are elections in Gaza, and Hamas, who are like militants, like quite extreme form of ideology, whatever. Think like, yeah, kill the Jews, whatever. They win democratically, and then Israel's like, no, we're not allowing that, and overthrows it, I believe, something like that. And then now this is where I could get wrong, so I won't go to too much. But things go back and forth, and they're firing rockets at civilians in Israel, so that's not cool either. But it goes back and forth, and they're killing each other. In the West Bank, basically they've been under military occupation essentially since 1967, and where there's checkpoint, you want to go anywhere, you go driving to the next town, you have to go through military checkpoints where the soldiers checking all your stuff, and they can just go inside your house and go look through your daughter's drawers or whatever, if they want. And not pretty. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I definitely wouldn't wish that on the Israelis, and so I don't think they should be doing it to the Palestinians, or the government shouldn't be. And a lot of people in Israel are very against what the government are doing, the Israeli government are doing, but a lot of them are for it. So it's complex. I think mostly our problems are with government, and so people, civilians, need to do what we're trying to do here. Consider other narratives, converse, use logic, use empathy and humanity, and try to get to the bottom of things, and become more enlightened and aware together, always grounding it in the sense of that we're all branches on the same tree of humanity and of life. This goes for animals as well, and all this, like we're all connected, we're all one. But anyway, so and not only that, living in this kind of open air prison for a long, long time, that's not very sustainable. Of course, it leads to militants and militancy. Um, and then on top of that, there's a lot of allegations that Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, and technically it's not a country, it's like territories, but they don't have a country status. Most people haven't recognized them. He's like a billionaire, he's corrupt, got all this money. I don't know. But anyway, the uh, the Israeli government has been turning a blind eye for a very long time, where with allowing Jews to Israelis to settle and confiscate land, take over land, and just kind of settle, colonize the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which is meant to be um, controlled by the Palestinians. Um, anyway, and so you can kind of see, like, look, it seems pretty clear. They're like, well, just trying to keep things on the low burner so people don't, like, oh, it's messed up, but what can we do? And then eventually it's too late. And if you look at the map right now, the area of the West Bank, which is actually settled and controlled by Palestinians, is like maybe half of it or something. It's like decreased a lot. And so these are all technically illegal settlements, but they're there. And then even now with the collapse of Syria, which it seems Israel was maybe a bit involved in, who knows? But like, they're in like southwest Syria, and are they just there temporarily, like the Golan Heights, where they took ages ago because their rockets were being fired at them from there, and they occupied it from the Syrians? Is it like temporary thing, or are they planning a greater Israel thing? And they want, historically we lived here, so who knows? Anyway, I think there's a fair argument that the Israelis kind of are like, well, it's justified. It means ends justify the means, and these people are crazy. Look, they're always trying to kill us. So yeah, but why? Why are they always trying to kill you? Maybe there's history there. And even if they did start it, which I don't think is the case, but like, it's such a terrible way to live in a state of war, constantly, and it so deprives you from the heart of Judaism, which is the mystical heart of this is oneness and love, and the tree of life. We're all one, you know, and so This is really difficult. And people say, October 7th, they attacked us. We need to fight them and destroy them. It's like, yeah, but Hamas were funded by Israel because they said like, well, we want an enemy, we want them to be crazy. If we allow the moderates to get control in the Palestinian movement, then we're going to get a two-state solution. We won't. So keep them kind of looking crazy, then we can keep expanding our control. It seems like that's what the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party's been doing. And, the clean break thing of like, trying to like just kind of overthrow all the governments around them so they don't need to make peace with them. And there's a strong argument that's what happened in Iraq, that the Israelis urged the Americans to go in there more or less on their behalf. But, and maybe it helped the American oligarchy as well, but nonetheless. So there's all these factors. So yeah, okay, certain Palestinians are uh, murdering innocent Israelis, but that goes the other way too. And if you look at things, it really does look like ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and that the Israelis are just and in a more subtle way in the West Bank. And again, coming from Ireland, um, uh, it's ethnic cleansing is not such a nice thing, and Ireland has been, suffered that under the English, and I think many countries have suffered that under, and it's not something so that we should be really allowing if possible. So I think yeah, um, so yeah, and I have a lot of people who I respect would be like, no, the Israelis are in the right in this, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. It sure seems like it's not right. There, and war is not right. So it's like you're both wrong. Who's right? I'm right. He's wrong. No, no, no. You're both wrong. Don't worry about it. Maybe that means you're both right. Um, anyway, so that's just my thoughts. That's what I know. And if we can talk more about it and share these points, then maybe we can get closer to figuring out what actually should happen. Um, and when the government says, yeah, we're going to go kill these people, if a huge amount of the population are more aware of facts, they can be like, but why? But that doesn't make sense. And asking questions, and then high-ranking members of the military, when they're at their dinner parties with their wife's friends, they're getting questions and it's awkward. Like, if enough people know stuff, we're all connected. It really does make a big difference. A lot of stuff gets by because it's plausible. But when you no longer have plausibility, then a lot of things can change. So again, just like Ukraine and Russia, I think the situation is complex and who knows exactly what's going on. But I sure feel like peace would be a good idea if we could stop killing each other there. And you could say no, but then it's like we need to finish this, otherwise it's going to come back. Yeah, maybe, or maybe you need to change the mindset, and maybe there's I think it would be beautiful if we could have, yeah, like Israel and a Palestinian state. Or if they want to all be one country, okay, cool, but figure it out through words, not through bullets. That's just my point of view there. All right. So, and again, especially when it's risking, World War III with, Israelis attacking Iran, and then now, Russia and China being in a block, BRICS, this alliance with, Iran or connected to Iran, then it risks this catastrophe. Could just absolutely destroy the whole world. Imagine, every beautiful movie you've watched. That's such a beautiful story. Oh my God, like the Notebook. Oh wow, all of that goes away. All the world is full of beauty, and it all goes away if we're not careful. So, third thing, China. Okay, Taiwan. So again, coming from the Irish perspective, being dominated by this foreign power, um, I have a lot of sympathy for the underdogs, and so Taiwan, and China, the Chinese system. It's like the government is very dominating, and I would say I I can see two sides of it, and I respect them, and I admire a lot of the things China in general, the culture. I think is very beautiful, and a lot of things I really like. And I've got a lot of Chinese people, I know, and I think they're really cool. Um, and again, like students and stuff, I love them. They're great, and Taiwanese, same thing. Met many, Taiwanese people, really cool people, and I can feel when they're like, we're in, a country. I go, fair enough, like, and I really feel for them. And I used to feel like, yeah, you are a country. Yeah, China shouldn't be pushing around, especially even if they were like democracy or whatever, but it's not their right to tell you who you're going to be with. Um, But it turns out, they're like this dictatorship where you can just go off to prison if someone doesn't like you, and or Falun Gong, they're like, doing meditation and like compassion and love and kindness, respect. And the government's like, yeah, that sounds okay, but your membership, you're getting more popular than the Communist Party. You're a threat. You're all, we're going to put you in prison and kill you and harvest your organs and send them off to the West for millions of dollars. And brutal stuff like that, and ethnic cleansing, and that with the Uyghurs and Tibet and all this stuff. Nasty, a bunch of, and like social credit score stuff where you can't get a visa or you can't get a train ticket or you can't go here or you can't do certain things if you're oh, you've been saying the wrong things about the government, or you don't do this, or a lot of stuff where everything is very unhealthy, and I worry that China, like the world, is turning into China, like Europe, where the government's surveilling us and trying to control us and all that stuff. So I have a lot of empathy for the Taiwanese being like, yeah, you don't want to be under that system. Um, however, I think with time, learning more, my perspective has developed more. So, um, for one thing, yeah, just to mention, like they were under military dictatorship until like the 90s, I think. So, it wasn't democracy back then either. But, uh, and like there was martial law and stuff. Uh, but now you can say, okay, it's democracy, and is it a real democracy? I'm not sure if there are any real democracies in the world right now. It looks more like oligarchies either being honest about it, and then oligarchies pretending to be democracies, um, in order to, because the culture of the people would be too risky. It's much easier to just go fly under the radar, as I believe is the case in Ireland, where I live. I think, it's not really democracy. It's a cleverly disguised oligarchy. Um, and anyway, but so okay, that's one thing. Maybe it's an oligarchy there as well, like it seems probably. But okay, whatever. Let's say it's democracy and it's different. Nonetheless, okay, so a bit of history. So there's the indigenous people of Taiwan. They've been there thousands of years. They're kind of like Austronesians, I think. So I think connected to like people of Papua New Guinea and like Polynesia and around the place. Kind of. I think they apparently fanned out from there and colonized or spread. I don't know. Anyway, indigenous people there, not ethnic Chinese. But now they're, I think, like 3% of the population or something like that, of modern Taiwan, because in basically the Dutch took control of the island, in the Dutch Empire, and I'm not sure exactly when, but in the 1600s they started bringing in Han Chinese, ethnic Chinese from the mainland of China, and there's mass immigration of them coming in, and and so that went on, and then I think, yeah, in there's a change of government in like China. Long story short, whatever. There's like some conflict between different emperors and different dynasties, and the Dutch sided with one, and then that didn't really work out with them so well eventually, and then people who were loyalists of the other emperor, whatever, they got rid of the Dutch, and so you have this kingdom in Taiwan who were ethnic Han, right? They're like Chinese, um, and that's their language, etc., or whatever. And they're there, and so there's still the indigenous people, but there's this ethnic Han, a lot of them, and that increased, it kept continuing. So this is like 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, um, ethnic Chinese, like seemingly the majority, I think, but like anyway, at least a lot of them. And then uh, you have in like I think 1895, like late 1800s, Japan takes control, and it's ceded, it's given up. I think that the Chinese empire at that point was pretty weak, and okay, they gave that up to the Japanese, who were kind of coming in, snipping off bits, and like just like the British took Hong Kong from them, um, you know, um, so which then returned to them in 1997, I think after a 150-year lease, or lease, like please, that they got through warfare. But anyway, so Japan's there, and then they're there until like they're defeated. Is it 1945? I think they got kicked out. So that's like, yeah, 50 years. Anyway, uh, they uh, just my baby's knocking on the door here. Soon, wrapping it up. Okay. So the Japanese then defeated in World War II, and the Chinese, there was the people who by then had gotten rid of the empire, the nationalists, right? the Kuomintang, whatever, they had taken over, like these kind of, oligarchy, capitalist kind of people. Um, they were there, and but they, kind of defeated. Well, they were fighting the Chinese, but also the communists fighting them. Anyway, the Japanese are banished out of China, right? But then there's the civil war in China, kind of continues or goes on, and the communists win, and Mao Zedong and all they take over, and the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, whatever, they retreat to Taiwan, and so and that's now their base, and they stay there, and they basically declare it um, they're there. But so the People's Republic of China, which is the communist thing, that was declared, and they took over mainland China, and they say, hey, Taiwan is also part of China. That's you owe that to us. You guys are not the illegitimate government. But the nationalists who are in Taiwan, they were called the Republic of China, right? Which is like controlling the whole of China before, and now they're just in Taiwan. But they continue. The official name of Taiwan is still the Republic of China, right? So if you're saying, oh, it's not China, well, why does it say the Republic of China in your name? So yeah, there's a different origin. There's the Dutch influence. There's the indigenous origins. But China is also full of different ethnic groups, not just Han. But like it's the majority are Han. But this is the way history works. A lot of groups, when we were less evolved, conquered other groups. Even the British into Ireland. Like I'm not going to be all like feeling a victim forever or whatever about it. It's like good things came from it. A lot of bad things came as well. Who knows what the balance is? I would say to the negative overall. It would have been better if we hadn't been genocided all those times. But nonetheless, you can't live in the past. You got to kind of move forward and be in the now. And so, okay, here we are. There's this strong ethnic Chinese heritage in Taiwan, and you're called the Republic of China. You're in, I think, 1971. I guess it's like the Americans coming in, setting up, like the special economic zones in China and kind of starting to use China as this factory, and so that they can save money. They don't have to build it in America. They build it in China. China gets, a lot of economic boost and all this stuff. Probably part of those deals, the vote in the United Nations, the People's Republic, the communist China is recognized as the legitimate leadership of China. And you know, and later at some point, I think in the 1991 or something, the Republic of China, Taiwan, formally goes, okay, yes, you're not illegitimate, you have the right to mainland China, but we have the right to Taiwan, you know, and the communists, like China, the People's Republic of China, sitting in Beijing, are like, no, that's also we don't recognize that. No, we don't recognize you, and also we won't connect diplomatically with any country who recognizes you as a country, and so that's a big force help preventing. That's why I think only two countries in the world recognize Taiwan as a country. Um, and so that's where it is. Now we could say, well, look, I wouldn't want to be under the thumb of, the Chinese Communist Party, but also I don't want World War III. And there is a strong ethnic Chinese history attached to Taiwan. So, like, what are we going to do? I don't know. Ideally, when Hong Kong was assimilated in from 1997 onwards into China, the democracy became more and more a facade, and there's protests there and stuff, and kind of dealt with fairly brutally, and it's becoming basically just the same as mainland China, and so you could worry about that in Taiwan if they were to be integrated. Or is there a way where it's like, okay, the American warships are going to leave and it'll be Chinese warships, but we give our word of honor that you will be independent, you have autonomy. Or if it's like some neutral country, has, forces there like BRICS countries or whatever, I don't know, or whatever, have something where there's no, like massive military build up around there, and it's not part of China. The People's Republic of China doesn't control it, but it's uh, we could say it's totally autonomous, but it's technically part of China, so they can say spiritually it's connected, or whatever. Fine, but definitely going to war over it doesn't make a lot of sense to me when there's strong narratives, strong arguments on both sides saying, oh, totalitarianism, we don't want it. Oh, but you're part of China, Republic of China, you belong to it, like and you're allowing the Americans are using you to be right next to us. It's very dangerous. We can't take that. It's a danger, it's a existential risk, etc. So there we have it. Three flashpoints: Ukraine, um, Israel, Palestine, and Taiwan. And so Um, this is just what I know so far. I'm not saying this is objectively true. I am saying I know a bunch of them, of things here are true for sure, but there's a lot of things I'm not certain about, or else I heard it and I haven't had enough time to be able to verify everything that I'm paying attention to. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to pay attention to that many things. So I try to strike a balance in terms of breadth and depth, where if I do too much, just depth, adequate depth on everything, then I'm missing a lot of breadth. And so it's not really, if I want to understand the world and engage and be a responsible citizen, and human being, then I want to have a balance of them. So it's tricky, and that's why we need each other. I need you, you need me. We need to talk to each other. We're outsourcing, we're crowdsourcing consciousness and awareness through honest, um, good faith, logical communication, being as aware as possible of our biases and the limitations of our understanding, and at all times urging for peace, for justice, for love, and for freedom and prosperity and the right to bloom beautifully for every nation on earth. And so that's a little bit from me. All right. So Garamila Mahagweev, thank you. Gach Banacht I, um, or Gach Banacht. Arv. And yeah, every blessing to all you watching. And let me know what you think in the comments. Be nice, please. I love you all. And yeah, I really do see the beauty and the worthiness of every side. Russia, Ukraine, Israelis and Jews, Palestinians and Arabs, the Taiwanese, the Chinese, across the board, the English, the Irish, um, and so the humans, you know. And so yeah, that's a bit from me. Please like the video, share the video, comment, and you can help me out by going to Amazon and buying one of my books. So I got a collection of short stories. Here you are. We got this. Rings Round the Mind, short story and tall tales. So 12, thought-provoking, funny, beautiful, poetic kind of language. Um, short stories, 12 of them. Then also we've got um, two poetry books. We've got I Am, Poems in Search of Spiritual Awakening, which is about, we're all one and all that stuff, and waking up from the dream of ego. And so you could, both of these are 10 quid each, 10 euros, so whatever, and, you know, American dollars, more or less. And then also Homecoming to a Foreign Land, which is my poetry book about Ireland, being born and raised in Australia, being Australian, but also realizing, oh, wait a minute, I'm Irish, and this goes much deeper, and I'm grateful to both sides. But and just what is Ireland and the Irish? What is it to be from somewhere? Who am I? Who are we? What's it all about? And it's the celebration of era of Ireland. So thanks everyone, and peace.